The Sun, Lord of Mysteries. Fanfiction, Chapter 141 to 150. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 141, Faith and Hope. On December 2, 1110, Blaze, Angel of Miracles, made a historic declaration in Backland Square in front of the entire empire. The Lord of Storms had died, slain by the eternal blazing sun, who had also seized his authority. The news was like a bomb that detonated in the feeble minds of mortals. Gods had always been omnipotent and all-powerful in their eyes. Above all, there were those who stood with the eternity. As a result, the prospect of a god's death stunned them to their core, little by little extinguishing the burning hope in their hearts. Faith was an important pillar of support in everyone's heart. This is especially true in these dark and desperate times. But a god had died. It demonstrated to the world that even the gods can succumb to the tide of time. So how about them? Can they even make it through the coming chaos? Many unsettling questions raced through their heads. Despair and hopelessness pervaded the world as the still darkness took their hearts, extinguishing the burning hope. Nevertheless, the historians did their job. Their quivering hands recorded history for future generations. The Holy War was a conflict between 7 churches. The gods themselves were said to have fought on Earth, pitting the primal forces of the cosmos against each other. A poetic historian even stated that the Holy War felt more like the entire world was at war with itself. The ending of the versions, however, was the same. The Lord of Storms was slain by the eternal blazing sun as the world-ending storm was engulfed by infinite pure light. The sun god then conquered the sky and ocean as his own crown. On December 10, 1110, the declaration's repercussions were still felt across the Trunsoest Empire, as nearly 1/5 of the empire's population lost their pillar of faith. Chaos erupted in the orderly utopia, leaving its imprint on the empire and threatening to tear it apart with its twisted claws. Ads by PubFuture. Surprisingly, the Night Emperor did not use his authority to forcefully suppress the chaos, but instead allowed it to happen, inadvertently eroding the empire's order. Meanwhile, the horns of war sounded once more as the undead army of Biome Empire, which had been stationed in the canal between the northern and southern continents, resumed their march into the northern continent, marching towards Trunsoest Empire. The Tudor Empire and the Solomon Empire both began mobilizing and marching against each other. The haze of war began to engulf the entire world yet again. The 11th of December 1110. Palace of Eternity, Backland. Silvery snow bled down from cloudy sky. It fell straight and steadily without a wind, in a soft universal diffusion more confusing than the gusts and eddies of the morning. It engulfed Backland's capital, creating an ethereal scene. There was no one in the streets, bridges, or balconies to witness this spectacle though, other than the sun god walking towards a towering door. As usual, the sun god, Audiobook, was dressed in black and white. The falling snow melted away around his figure. While a faint horn echoed in the background, he looked behind the desolate city. That sound was drowned out by the countless prayers ringing in his ears. He set aside his prayers for his kingdom and focused on the Palace of Eternity. Om. The last 10 days with Lilith had been nothing but debauchery. They mostly ignored the outside world, only indulging in each other's bodies all day and night. They did, however, put an end to their revelry yesterday, as the deteriorating situation in the outside world demanded their immediate attention, no matter how reluctant they were to separate. Lilith left to the Twilight Kingdom in the morning to meet with her son, to discuss the situation of death and matters concerning the ruined street. He did, however, remember to pull her for another round right then and there before she left. Audiobook smirked and shook his head as he remembered her glare at the time, but her swift actions and reactions told a completely different story. While deep in thought, he arrived in front of the colossal door of the royal palace, which was guarded by hawk-eyed demigods walking back and forth. Ads by PubFuture. Audiobook did not enter through the door, instead peering up at the palace's highest balcony. With a tap of his shoe on the cold ground, he floated up and flew towards it. After a few moments of being assailed by the cold wind, he gently landed on the balcony, looking ahead. Trunsoest, the Night Emperor, walked out of the study room and onto the balcony, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Congratulations, Your Excellency." He smiled and offered him a cup of coffee. "Just the way you like it." Audiobook accepted the coffee with a smile on his lips. They stood next to each other on the balcony, overlooking the City of Hope. "You know," he said in between sips, "you don't have to call me Excellence anymore. You may address me by name." "No." Trunsoest shook his head, "I prefer it this way. It felt strange calling you by name in my mind." "Whatever you want in the end," Akasis said, looking at him. "But I don't mind if that's your concern." Trunsoest nodded lightly before turning his gaze to the City of Hope for a few moments, sipping his coffee. His golden eyes dimmed as he finally spoke. "The hope you gave them is waning." "You are mistaken," Akasis stated as he looked at the desolate City of Hope. "I didn't give them hope. Even if one is God, one cannot grant hope." Trunsoest looked at him, surprised. He went on, indicating his heart. "All I did was ignite the hope. It always exists in hearts of all. One needs enough faith to discover it themselves. And I just gave them that. Faith and hope." Trunsoest murmured. "It does makes a lot of sense. As we speak, Your Excellency, mothers are taking their last breaths with their children huddled in a cold bunker. The very last goodbyes are being said to their loved ones as they leave for the war. Men and women slowly marching out of the empire holding the flag in silence, their dimming eyes losing the last glimmer of hope, a pair of lovers jumping off the mountain, kissing each other one last time." Akasis listened calmly, his eyes as indifferent as ever. He put away his empty cup on the railing on the balcony. He finally looked at him and spoke verily. "Chaos, Trunsoest, sometimes chaos is necessary." Adds by PubFuture. "A god's fall cannot be completely concealed, especially in this era. It will be revealed one way or another, though the consequences will be less severe than they are now." Akasis decided to go ahead with it regardless of the consequences, in order to avoid any future problems with the faith. "I know," Trunsoest gave a forlorn smile. "There must be chaos before order. Neither can exist without the other." "Indeed," Akasis nodded, still surprised by his change. "It's like two sides of the same coin. However, this does not preclude you from carrying out your order. Never forget, balance is key. Chaos and order come second." "I would do well to remember that," Trunsoest muttered, his dimmed eyes brightening, "but order alone will not end this period of despair and hopelessness. In fact, it may worsen the situation. Give it some time." Looking around the desolate city, Akasis suggested. "The scars will fade with time. People will eventually move on." Trunsoest nodded quietly, his golden eyes still flashing with excruciating visions and images. "Who do you think you'll face first, Trunsoest?" Akasis suddenly asked, noticing his depressed heart. "First," Trunsoest was silent in thought before answering. "Salinger. It will be him. Inform me before you go into battle," Akasis said solemnly. "I'll fight alongside you." Trunsoest didn't seem surprised and also didn't ask any questions. He simply nodded in agreement. Then he said quietly, looking into Akas's eyes. "Thank you." Akasis patted his shoulders. "It's always you, Trunsoest. Remember that, I just showed you the path. Even so, thank you for everything." Trunsoest bowed slightly. Akasis smiled. "Walk your path, Trunsoest. The last piece of advice I can give you is to quit bowing, not even to me." When Trunsoest heard this, he immediately looked up, only to see golden particles of light fade into obscurity. Chapter 142, The Dance of the Living and Dead. 20th of December, 1110. Nubara Valley, outside the Trunsoest Empire, near the canal connecting the northern and southern continents. The sky was bright with the dimming sun adorning the heavens, letting out weak rays, providing the only source of warmth to troops of soldiers marching troop by troop, company by company huddled together bravely and assiduously towards their damnation. Its receding light reflected their drawn swords, turning them from white to pale orange. The golden tips of the flag carried by the leading angels appeared to be on fire. The flags, bearing the Trunsoest Empire's emblem, were waving brilliantly against the dark background. The metal armor of those winged beings were laced together with cords of brilliant hues. The horses clamped nervously at the bits of their bridles, the tension and fear palpable. The angels on silver horses came to a halt in the middle of the Nubara Valley after a 10-day march. Thousands of men and women stamped on the snowy ground one last time, their sabaton-worn feet sinking lightly into the snow. There was no one in sight, just a vast expanse of blemish-free white. It appeared ethereal, and yet this beautiful sight did not calm the men and women's hearts. The ferocious masks covered their faces, hiding the rivulets of sweat trickling down, despite the cold, at the unknown that awaited them. They were as motionless as the statue, their eyes fixed on the expanse of white. Outwardly, many looked tough and brave, but their true feelings were another matter. Hatred, tension, and fear were almost palpable in everyone's eyes. Their bodies were trembling like cobwebs in a strong wind. As the unknown approached, the darkness of despair corrupted their hearts. They could hear a slight rumble of the ground, something terrible, something that every living being fears, was awakening deep within. It was death. Rumble. The earth shook and then roared. Cracks appeared throughout White Valley. A dark and thick stream of water rushed out, emitting a gloomy aura. Skeleton hands grabbed the air as the dead crawled their way into the world of the living. They were thousands upon thousands of them, rising from a surging dark river, and as they emerged, the Empire's army became jittery and began to pull back, as the clanging of dropped weapons could be heard from the ground. Ads by PubFuture. Hold your ground. An angel in silver armor with the emblem of the balance scale engraved upon it, demanded. The dead are no match for us. With his order, the disorder in his ranks vanished, as the soldiers stood their ground, seemingly with a newfound resolve, overcoming their fear and dread. The sky had darkened. The shadows grew thicker. A harsh war horn rang, rattling the hearts of the living. And, as the dead formed their ranks with their swords, axes, and spears, an enamour's chariot rode out of the dark river, withering everything in its path. The chariot was inlaid with obsidian and gold and was adorned with scenes of agonizing death. Azek Eggers, the former emperor of Byam, was at the helm. Azek Eggers wore a deep black robe embroidered with golden lines. On top of his head was a bird-shaped crown that radiated pure terror. It shimmered in pale flames, reached into living minds, and ignited their worst nightmares, their deepest fears, rattling them to their souls in abject terror. Only the authority and power of the silver-armored angel kept them from fleeing in dread. The Death Consul's eyes were indifferent, without a hint of emotion. As shadowy horses neighed, the chariot came to a halt in front of the army of the dead. With a deep pale fire igniting within his obsidian dark iris, he swept a glance at the army of living, making everyone grab their weapon with sweat trickling down their backs. Azek Eggers tightened his grip on the reins and rode slowly towards the living, as if he intended to follow the ancient laws and state his demands. The living angels' grip on their weapons loosened. He then declared coldly, without any warning, "Charge!" A flood of pale fire erupted from his charging figure, transforming into a massive feathered serpent with colossal wings that seemed to cover the entire sky. A burst of twilight erupted from the ranks of the living, forming a massive board sword. It rose to the sky as if held in place by an invisible hand, tearing the space in its region and precisely piercing into a descending feathered serpent. A painful cry erupted as a storm of orange twilight and pale fire erupted from the clash, capable of incinerating everything in its path. The chaos, however, had no effect on the living as order shrouded them, negating it. Under the twilight and death, the armies of the living and dead clashed. As the scorching sea of scarlet liquid stained the white snowy valley, Nubara Valley exploded in absolute chaos. Ads by PubFuture. Above the whirlwind of chaos and disorder, in the sky, a phantom of a twisted structure slowly emerged from the spirit world, dimming the eternal sun in the sky by just its presence. The structure was in the shape of an inverted pyramid, with infinite layers stacked on top of each other, swirling into the thick and still darkness. As if sensing the emergence, an enormous hand extended out of the eternal night, covered in dark hair and thousands of meters long, holding a dark scythe shrouded in silent darkness. Then it swung the scythe at the phantom, obscuring the sky and earth in night. With an earth-shattering roar, the phantom of the inverted pyramid was split in half. It was rolled back into the spirit world, crumbling. The armies of the living and dead still fought with all their might as the night receded away into obscurity, completely oblivious to all that transpired, just like the rest of the world. Few minutes earlier, Twilight Kingdom. Inside a majestic palace bathed in dusk, 3 divine beings were present at a long twilight table. "Are you too serious about this?" Looking at the Akases and Lilith, a sunset giant asked, his chin supported by his long hand. "Yes, Badial." Lilith nodded firmly, gripping Akase's hand snugly. "Well," Badial drawled, then fell silent, as if at a loss for words. "Whether you like it or not, we're going to marry," Lilith said, her head held high. Ads by PubFuture. Marriage. Akases was taken aback. "Sometime in the future," Lilith stated. She then glared at him, noticing his still stunned expression. "Right." "Yes." Akases briskly nodded, his gaze shifting between Lilith and Badial. "Obviously. So, Badial, do you have anything to say? Lilith had a satisfied expression before turning to face her son, and asking again. Badial chuckled. I was just taken aback, you know. I thought you were both just messing around. But now, mother, I am relieved that you have found someone you truly love. All I can give you both is my blessings for a happy future. Lilith brightly smiled, as she nodded in joy. That's more than enough, son. We will send you the first invitation. Akasis immediately added with her, earning himself yet another glare. Badial shook his head with a slight smile, seeing this. However, something interrupted them. The waning dusk in the Twilight Kingdom dimmed even further, attracting all of their attention. It's Salinger. Lilith frowned, her eyes closed. He is trying to descend. Right away, Badial's expression darkened, his long hand reaching for the hilt of his sword. It seems so. Akasis chuckled. He truly lives up to his rumored madness. He continued, looking at Badial, who was getting up for battle. Sit down, Badial. Ammonizes is on her way here. She will take care of him. As if to confirm his words, the waning twilight returned to its previous state with an aura of tranquility filling the Twilight Kingdom. Chapter 143, The Alliance of the Four Gods. As an aura of tranquility filled the air, the waning light dimmed even more than before. A ray of darkness erupted from the darkest point, heralding the arrival of the night over half of the Twilight Kingdom. The ray soared towards High Castle, up to the highest balcony, and into a room with a twilight table. It then exploded and out of it came an ethereal woman with a crimson moon phantom behind her head. Ammonizes. Lilith rose from her seat and smiled warmly at the ethereal woman. Badial grumbled at the appearance of the woman, putting away his sword of dusk and sitting down on his chair, leaning back. Umbella. Ammonizes smiled as she greeted her. Akasis. She also greeted them. Badial. Akasis nodded lightly to her. Badial placed his hand on his chin, indifferent. Sit with me. Lilith drew her to a seat near her. Ammonizes followed and sat. Badial. Akasis said deeply, looking at the sunset giant, who remained indifferent. Badial finally snorted and waved his hand. A cup of wine floated out of the twilight and landed in front of Ammonizes, who accepted it with a nod. The hall was filled with silence and serenity. Akasis exchanged glances with Lilith before beginning on the issue. We have gathered here to face the threat, Akasis said, with a solemn expression on his face. If not nipped in the bud, it may very well be the end of all of us. So, it's time to put our differences aside. He went on, his gaze passing over all of them, and band together to deal with the threat. Adds by PubFuture. If we are to form any sort of alliance, some level of transparency is required. Looking at Ammonizes, Badial said loudly. Akasis and Lilith also turned their attention to Ammonizes. Ammonizes remained silent for a moment before speaking up, her voice ethereal. Salinger has found a connection with the river of eternal darkness. Is that enough, Badial? She asked, an eerie aura filling the hall. Badial didn't seem surprised, only a glint of realization flashed across his orange eye. It really is. He exhaled a sigh. When did you doubt? Lilith asked with raised brows. I was always skeptical, Badial stated calmly. After all, death is closer to the eternal river than darkness and twilight. It could be regarded as a foundation for the path. He looked at Ammonizes, who was deafeningly quiet. He continued, shaking his head. The seal on the end of the world is deteriorating, and the Sephirots are extending their tentacles out into the world. It's pretty clear already after the Blood Moon Night. So it wasn't difficult to connect the dots with Salinger's situation. Ammonizes. His eye narrowed as he finally said. It's more than enough. Ammonizes remained silent, her fingers crossed. Then, she turned to look at Akasis. The meaning was obvious. That decides it. Akasis smiled, leaning forward in his head. The alliance of the four gods. No contract. Ammonizes added immediately. Yes. Badial echoed with her, surprisingly. There is no need for any contract. Adds by PubFuture. I wasn't planning on having one anyway. Akasis laughed. You know, I get bound just like everyone else. In relief, Badial and Ammonizes leaned back in their seats, their shoulders lightly sagging together. You have a terrible sense of naming. Lilith cocked her brow while smirking. You know that. I know. Akasis shot back. So, could you bequeath a befitting title? I'll replace it right away. Lilith went silent at that, as laughter echoed across the hall. Let's concentrate on the problem, Badial said, a slight headache forming as he considered the future. Akas's laughter died away. Right. He sipped his wine before speaking solemnly. Salinger tried to openly descend on the northern continent, ignoring our presence and the consequences. Ammonizes, however, foiled his attempt. But this should be more than enough to demonstrate his madness. He continued, his gaze divided between Ammonizes and Bodil. Salinger is fighting the erosion of the river of eternal darkness, even attempting to control it. There are also consequences for biting more than you can chew. His sanity is slipping, and when it finally reaches boiling point, our world may be unable to withstand the resulting explosion. Akas's is finished, reclining back in his chair and sipping his wine. Salinger was still in his underworld. He hasn't left since the beginning of the century. It was what caused their awkward situation. They very much wanted to eliminate Salinger. However, the underworld is in their way. They can only sit and wait until Salinger decided to leave the underworld and confront him. The tributary of River of Eternal Darkness is in the underworld. Unless they all have a death wish, they don't dare invade the underworld. And, in this war, they were already on the passive side, whether they liked it or not, as they could do nothing about the situation in the underworld. The air was thick with heaviness. Bodil looked Ammonizes and inquired, "Did you notice anything unusual during his attempt?" Ads by PubFuture. No. Ammonizes tilted her head. There was nothing there. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been so simple to destroy. So, Bodil sighed and tapped his finger on the armrest. It's possible that his river situation is still complicated. He might even give up. Well, Lilith said, shaking her head, he could also be putting up a front to lower our guard before striking and drowning us in the river. It's definitely a possibility. Akas's concurred. Whatever happens, Ammonizes said, looking around. We should plan for the worst-case scenario. That is, Bodil asked. Salinger went completely mad in the process and also managed to gain a portion of the control over the tributary. Akas's spoke up, his eyes solemn. We shall besiege Salinger at the first chance and kill him before things spiral to exactly that. It's going to hard to be kill him, Akas's. Lilith mused, after all, he is death. There's also Sasrir, Bodil said, his face solemn. Recent changes on the continent only point in that direction. I think, Ammonizes said, ethereally, looking at Akas's. Sasrir could very well join hands with Salinger just to deal with you. Akas's remained silent for a moment while listening to everyone before saying. It will undoubtedly be difficult to kill Salinger. Hell, the chances of us succeeding on the first try are extremely slim. But we are still going to attack with everything we have. No.B in .c ohm. As for Sasrir, Trunsoest will most likely join us as well. He will restrain them if they interfere, and one of us may assist Trunsoest if the situation becomes dire on his side. He went on, his tone low. If, just if, Salinger could already draw power from the River of Eternal Darkness. Except for myself and Ammonizes, everyone should immediately withdraw from the main battlefield. His solemn gaze was drawn to Lilith. Bodil and Ammonizes nodded to his words. Lilith chuckled, trying to dispel the heaviness. We still have plenty of time, you know, the war may not happen for decades, and even then, Salinger may not have achieved that control. Still, Akas's said, pressing his temples, given what has just happened, we will prepare for the worst and be ready at a moment's notice. After seeing their silence, he concluded. That concludes the meeting. We shall adjourn here once a year until the war. Chapter 144, New Year. 11:55 p.m. 31st, December, 1110. Trier, Tudor Empire. The starlight gleamed brightly in the dark night, illuminating the city of the sun in all its silver prowess. The Sun City had regained some of its lost radiance, as the light of hope burned brightly in people's hearts despite the world's wars and chaos. The city was filled with glittering golden lights as people gathered in empty streets, balconies, bridges, and squares, each holding a lantern. Every street corner was bustling with men and women, with blaring music and chiming clocks in the background. In the city square of Trier, people danced through the armor and fumes of food and cigar. They forgot about their worries and fears, simply letting go and letting the music guide them to the beat with only happiness and joy. It was teeming with people walking back and forth holding lanterns, their gaze fixed on the city's largest clock tower on the other side. Lilith and Akas's walked through the bustling crowds, caught up in a whirlwind of jollity and gaiety. The situation on the front lines is deteriorating, Lilith said, holding his hands. Well, Akas's nodded, Solomon and Alitza may enter the battlefield soon. So it doesn't really matter that much. Don't be so lethargic about war, Akasas. Remember, it was you who said, it's only the beginning of the end, Lilith chastised. I know, I was just having some time, you know, with you. Akasas drawled, his brow furrowed. Lilith said, I get it, my love. But the time has come. Harabergen is still alive and well. He could be plotting something against you while you're still on reprieve with me. You don't have to be concerned about Harabergen. Akasas spoke lethargically. I have a way to deal with him. Ads by PubFuture. That is, Lilith pressed. War. Akasas stated plainly. Just war. Schemes will not work with the omniscient one. The only option is to fight to the death. Though, given the changing winds of time, I doubt I'll be able to deal with him in this epic. But I still have an edge over him. Edge, Lilith snorted, her concern visible in her eyes. You have yet to be promoted. I will. Akasas drew her in closer. After 12 a.m., my love, you can finally put your worries to rest. November LBJNN. Lilith's smile broadened, her worries dissipating. Then she dragged him to the center of the square as the clock's handle approached midnight, as if she couldn't wait any longer. You changed the date of the Lantern Festival? Lilith inquired, pushing her way through the crowds. Yeah, war and chaos continue to ravage the world, Akasas said, nodding. I wanted to give the rest of the world a reprieve, just as we had. So I pushed it to the new year. It actually goes very well with the new year. Lilith observed the bustling city. They finally reached the center of the square, standing in the same spot where they had both stood with each year ever since the last century. It does, doesn't it? Akasas said, his gaze sweeping around the cheerful crowd. Then I'll make it permanent. Oh, Lilith beamingly smiled. You didn't have to do that for me. Who said it was just for you? Akasas smirked with raised brows. He even went into detail. The Lantern Festival theme was originally intended for the new year. Lilith's smile froze, as he laughed and took out the lantern with the sun and moon emblem from Fabric of Space. You know, it's time. He went on, raising the lantern to her face to calm her nerves. Lilith finally pouted and turned away. Lit it up. Akas's smile widened as he lit it with sun's golden fire and extended it to her. Then, just like every year, they held it together. Ads by PubFuture. An ethereal gong rang out across the city, signaling the arrival of midnight. The lights in the city went out, and silence descended on the city. Let's do it, Lilith said, her eyes fixed on the lantern. Akasas nodded. They lifted the sun and moon lanterns into the sky, keeping their gaze fixed on each other, as they did every year. Eventually, they let go of the lantern and let it fly into the cosmos. The people around them soon followed suit, as the atmosphere became serene and still. The lanterns slowly rose to the sky, like stars illuminating the dark sky of the cosmos. They were like a serenade with the emotions and stories of many. Akasas drew Lilith to him in the light of the lanterns, placing his hands on her hips. Happy New Year, my love. He spoke softly. Lilith smiled and responded with action, kissing him on the lips. Boom. The sky was illuminated by firecrackers, which exploded into thousands of specks of light. A cacophony of music filled the city of sun as the divine couple danced in the midst of the bustling crowd, unconcerned about the world. 6.00 am. 1, January, 1111. The Boundless Oceans. Akasas and Lilith appeared with a flash of light after celebrating through the first hours of the new year. They landed gently on the ocean, waiting for the herald of dawn. A orange and yellow bright orb emerged gradually. It began to rise higher and higher, and the colors became more vibrant. Ads by PubFuture. The sky and the ocean became one, and light shone across the water. The sky began to cast all of its colors into the water. The light began to shine brighter and brighter to eliminate the darkness. The sunrise glistened on the water, and the birds began to fly peacefully above it. The sound of birds chirping and the gentle breeze coming off the water bring a sense of calm. Lilith shifted her gaze away from the sun. Have your anchors been stabilized? Akasas said, by midnight. Lilith nodded without surprise and continued. Are you ready, my love? Akasas raised his hand. A flash of lightning erupted, morphing into a blot, the uniqueness of Tyrant. I am. Taking a deep breath, he said. Lilith leaned in for a kiss. Go ahead and ascend without worry. I will shield you from any intrusions. Akasas nodded and walked ahead on the ocean of the floor, while Lilith stood there watching him. It's finally time, He has arrived, ready to take his first step toward omnipotence and omniscience. His eyes flashed with memories of the past, making him seem slightly reminiscent. Despite all the hurdles and obstacles in his path, he succeeded in the end. This was only the beginning. He still has a long way to go. His grip on the lightning blot became tighter. The accommodation would almost certainly not be pleasant. He wasn't just postponing his promotion for a reprieve. It was primarily to give his anchors time to stabilize after being severely impacted by the war. He even delayed the Lantern Festival to expedite the process of stabilization. And, just as he had anticipated, his anchors had stabilized by midnight. Akasas raised his blot and looked at it silently for a moment before infusing it with his authority. The blot instantly transformed into a bolt of lightning, striking his chest. A vast and boundless aura erupted from him, enveloping the infinite sky and boundless ocean. The accommodation finally began. Chapter 145, The Symbol of Power. Akasas raised the blot and looked at it silently for a moment before instilling his authority in it. The blot transformed into a bolt of lightning and struck his chest. From him erupted a vast and unbounded aura, enveloping the infinite sky and limitless ocean. An ancient will that had been weakening suddenly flared up its mighty tentacles in his soul, as if wanting to tear his persona asunder. Pain, an inconceivable amount of pain erupted from within his soul, coursing through every part of his body. To say it was excruciating and agonizing would be an understatement. He felt as though his entire body was being slowly stretched apart while being pierced by thousands of cold blades. His face twisted in agony as sweat fell from his brow onto the ocean, evaporating everything in its path. He knelt on the ocean's surface as the twisted mummers intruded into his mind. Boom, boom, the figure of Akasas suddenly emitted infinite blots of lightning, aimed at the sky. It spread across the entire infinite sky like thrown branches, forming a silver forest. The boundless oceans began to surge with massive waves that rolled towards the southern and northern continents, reaching stormy clouds. The continents began to shake to their very foundations, causing massive structures all over the world to collapse one after the other. A swath of dark clouds began to imprint their mark in the infinite sky, forming an abyss of stormy clouds that seemed to engulf the eternal sun. Ads by PubFuture. The entire world was enveloped in a cataclysmic aura. In a daze, mortal and extraordinary looked at the cataclysmic sight that dawned within a second, while gods turned their gazes to the boundless oceans, to the location where Akasas was ascending. A dark hand reached out from the eternal night and waved at the approaching tsunami, causing the restless waves to immediately smooth out and fall apart in serenity. A massive broadsword bathed in twilight emerged from the waning twilight, sending a beam of orange light streaking into the abyss of storms, instantly dividing it in two. The storm clouds faded away in the twilight. Atop the crumbling palace of eternity, a massive inverse scale appeared, emitting a bronze light constituted of a law, sweeping the continents and stopping the rumbling from spreading further. Meanwhile, in the center of the silver forest, a massive luminescent tree rose up, dwarfing everything. Its roots reached the core and its branches reached the horizon, emitting a gentle aura. It exerted Earth's authority, temporarily halting any disaster across the globe. The silver forest faded away before it could tear the sky asunder with its tendrils of lightning. It also encircled the central region, embracing Akasas and blocking any malicious power from interfering with his ascension. In a colossal white tower near the ruins of the Masin, an old man with long beard looked out of the window from the tallest floor onto the central region with his starry eyes twinkling. His hold on a white book tightened. His grip on the book suddenly loosened and his starry eyes dimmed as his gaze swept towards the dark hand and gigantic broadsword extending from eternal night and waning twilight. The old man sighed deeply, turning away from the window and walking to the table in between the bookshelves, where he sat on the chair in front, placing the book on the wooden table and opening it. The pages turned on their own as the old man looked around his tower, seemingly waiting for the pages to settle. Ammoniz's betrayal came as a complete surprise. He deduced Akasas was putting on a front to set up a trap for him or Leodoro, while also having a last card up his sleeve to deal with them. In the end, he did not take the risk, whereas Leodoro did. Ammoniz's was the one who eventually accompanied him. Whatever card he has, at least both of them should be able to bear it. Ads by PubFuture. But she betrayed him. It was all a ruse from the beginning. The ruse that managed to fool both reality and him, Omniscient One. The old man shook his head, a wry smile on his face. It was pointless to wallow in the past. Aukas's is already on his way to becoming a dual-pathway god. With the sun and tyrant authorities combined, he will soon become the symbol of power. He can't stop it, even if he really wants to. He has far too many allies watching his back. By this point, he realized he had mostly lost the path of the Almighty to Aukas's. But he wasn't going down without a fight, even if it meant his death in the end. He wasn't going to back down in fear or caution for his life, as he had done for most of his life. Not anymore. The old man turned to face his book. The pages finally stopped turning, settling on the final page. There was a drawn picture of a massive silver moon high in the sky, reflected in the boundless black ocean. The image was serene yet eerie, beautiful yet repugnant, purifying yet tainting, orderly yet contorted. Aukas's knelt on the surface of the boundless oceans, a pair of fiery wings erupting from behind his back, sending a blaze of golden fire at the luminescent tree, rattling it. His mind was being assaulted by twisted murmurs that were tearing his psyche apart. It was a mash-up of every blasphemous sound in existence, thundering and reverberating through his mind over and over. Ads by PubFuture. Aukas's remained conscious despite the excruciating pain coursing through his entire body, soul, and mind, though his firm will was shaky under the assault of the ancient will. As golden blood spurted from his lips, he gritted his teeth. The murmurs increased as if noticing his deteriorating condition. Enough, he roared. The luminescent tree cracked in the middle, splintering its branches apart. Even so, the tree's embrace did not loosen, but rather tightened. Aukas's, a voice broke through the murmurs. Aukas's gradually felt love, endless love of his beloved. He could sense his angel's concern. He sensed his believer's sincere and pious prayers. His dimming eyes gradually regained their radiance. Thousands of suns bloomed in brilliance in his soul, resisting the will. The murmurers in his mind fractured as he used his authority to literally shatter it. Aukas's rose from the raging surface of the ocean, his figure bathed in light and lightning. His two long wings changed, with the feathers on the right wing encased in pure light and the other in white lightning. He finally suppressed the ancient will in his body with his sheer will and anchors, which actually weakened even further with his victory. Once he raised his hand, a flash of lightning erupted, transforming into a blue scepter. A blinding ray of light morphed into a white crown above his head. Lilith appeared above him, floating. With a relieved smile, she took the crown in her hand and placed it on his head. Aukas's finally raised his specter at the sky, his lips rising to form a psyched smile. A bolt of white lightning flared up, ascending to the astral world and imploding into light. The light roared in an instant, illuminating the corrupted planets outside the barrier, nearby star systems, and even a portion of the Milky Way. It was as though a bright star rose from within swirling galaxy, dwarfing everything. It heralded the birth of the symbol of power. Chapter 146, Amelia Jacob. The 1st of January 1111. The eternal blazing sun accommodated the tyrant uniqueness, becoming the symbol of power. He gained the authority of the sky, ocean, lightning and calamity. The Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun changed religious canon, as the honorific titles of the Sun God, Guardian of Business, and God of Contracts, was removed, replaced by Ruler of the Sky, and Progenitor of Day. The title, Symbol of Power, was added to the honorific title. The scared emblem of the eternal blazing sun was also altered, as now there was a clear blue sky visible with the blazing sun. These sudden changes, with the abated calamity, made it clear to the world that the eternal blazing sun had usurped the throne of the Lord of Storms, conquering the sky and ocean as his own crown. The historians recorded all that transpired in vivid detail. As for whether future generations take the facts as fables or factual history, no one could guess. The 7th of January 1111. The war between the empires was on full throttle. The army of the dead laid waste to all life as the ruthless stamped across the grounds of the northern continent. The Solomon Empire had allied with the Biam Empire at the beginning of the war. The two empires joined their entire might to go on a frontal assault on the Trunsoest Empire and Tudor Empire. The small skirmishes between the Trunsoest and Tudor empires ceased, as they were forced to deal with the coming assault of the allied empires. Tudor and Trunsoest didn't ally with each other, though, but there was tacit understanding between the two of them, bringing temporary peace between them until the threat of death and the Black Emperor was dealt with. The 20th of January 1111. War. War raged across the lands in between like never before, even dwarfing the Holy War. The bards sang the tales of the mighty angels and valiant heroes in the cities far from the front lines. They didn't label it as a war in their songs, rather a dance of the living and dead. Thus, the moniker of the most famous war of the epic came to be through the songs of the bard and the whispers of the tattleteller, reaching into the sharp ears of the historians. They recorded it, the dance of the living and dead. The 3rd of April 1111. The Orthodox churches finally broke their long silence and entered the war after the army of the dead breached the front lines. The Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun, Earth Mother, God of Combat, and Evernight Goddess declared their alliance on the same day, entering the war under the leadership of the Archangel, Thunder God, Lucas Reyes. Meanwhile, the Church of the God of Steam and God of Knowledge also entered the war, siding with the Night Emperor. It had developed into a war that no one could skirt. Ads by PubFuture. The 23rd of June 1111. As the war raged on the front lines, which had been saved by the troops of Orthodox churches joining the war, a new religion sprung up in the Tudor Empire, worshipping the goddess of wisdom. The Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun acknowledged the religion of the goddess of wisdom as orthodox while the crown remained silent regarding the religion. The faith in crown. A crack was already visible for those with keen eyes to see within the empire. The religion of the goddess of wisdom blatantly preached that their goddess was the true embodiment of knowledge, while the god of knowledge and wisdom was nothing but a charlatan. The 5th of March 1112. Tensions between faith and the empires were at an all-time high, but a common enemy forced them all to band together, whether they wanted to or not. The dance of the living and dead continued, as the allied troops finally pushed past the canal with the combined might of 30 angels. Thus, the counter-invasion begins. 10 years later, on March 6, 1122. In an army tent near the front lines, the canals, a woman with flaxen-colored hair knelt down on the floor, her hands tightly clutching a sacred emblem of the eternal blazing sun. She muttered, her voice quivering in despair and misery. Before her were 3 candles lit up in golden flames and a white knife inserted into the cup of clear water, surrounded by white flowers. Eternal blazing sun, inextinguishable light, progenitor of day, embodiment of order. Ads by PubFuture. Ruler of the sky, the symbol of power, I pray for God's grace. I pray for salvation, please save my family. November LBJNN. She whimpered out, her figure trembling as tears trickled down her cheeks, falling onto the ground. Please. The golden flames burning in the candle still burned the same without the slightest change. Believe in the might of the gods, not in their benevolence. The gentle yet strenuous voice of her ancestor resounded in her mind, as her heart sank further into pits of despair, looking at the unchanging candles. No number NO, she sobbed, clutching the emblem of the eternal blazing sun tightly. However, she refused to give up hope. She took a deep breath, pressing all her wallowing emotions. Then, she prayed, her scarred heart steeling for the terrible words that she was about to utter. I pray for your salvation in exchange for the eternal servitude of my family. Amelia Jacob was who she was, a saint of the noble and illustrious family of Jacob. They were fierce and loyal supporters of the Blood Emperor, himself. They were one of the angel families of the realm, with an archangel as an ancestor. It was more than enough to exemplify their status and origin. They were supposed to be praised, honored, and showered in glory and fame. Ads by PubFuture. Yet, everything was falling apart. It was already far too gone by the moment she realized the problem. Her ancestor suddenly changed. Everything changed. His behavior, actions, bearing. It was almost like he was possessed by someone else. Then, without warning, he completely disappeared from the face of the earth. Things just didn't stop there. The change was spreading like a tumor, infecting everything. The angels of her family began to show drastic changes just like her ancestor, one after another. She wasn't a fool, nor were the other high-sequence beyonders in her family. She inferred that somebody or something was parasitizing the members of her family, even her ancestor. And it had succeeded without a hitch, without causing even the slightest hiccup. That revelation sent a chill down her spine, making her heart freeze in terror. And she immediately knew who was targeting her family. Only Amen, god of deceit and son of the Creator, had the power to accomplish this. Her true nightmare began with her realization. Her loved ones were immediately replaced the very next hour. They tried to act the same way, though the glaring differences were all clearly visible to her. Then, without even giving her time to process shock, They took out a monocle and wore it over their right eyes and greeted her in unison with their distinctive voices, their lips suffused with a smile that she will never be able to forget for the rest of her life. Her mother, her brother, and her sister. She ran to seek help, ran to escape, ran to warn others. She just ran without daring to turn back, as an amused chuckle kept reverberating in her mind. She ran to the capital, front lines, and army camps, wherever she could sense the rest of her family. Yet, what she found broke her heart evermore. He was everywhere, waiting for her, greeting her the same way through the mouths of her family. Everyone and everything was gone. The last bits of her darkening world would have collapsed if not for the bleak hope, which was also threatening to extinguish with a still echoing amused chuckle. She didn't dare stop on her journey, her heart quivering in fear at what might await her, if she stopped. She ran now to find help, to find a way to save her family. But who was capable of rescuing them from the clutches of the blasphemer, who dared to defy the gods themselves? However, there was still hope. She desperately clung to it and prayed for salvation, not caring for the prize or consequences. It didn't matter anymore. So, she prayed to him, with the last of her extinguished hope. Suddenly, the golden flames on the candle flickered, as a fierce gale swept into the tent. A looming shadow was cast over her praying figure. She jerked her head immediately, only to directly look into the golden eyes that gleamed with resplendent light just like the eternal sun in the sky. She felt too small under the gaze, almost like a particle of dust. "Never forget your words," a divine voice thundered in her mind, as she felt something bound into her soul, forcing her completely unconscious. "Amelia Jacob, you and your family shall forever serve me from this moment forth." Chapter 147, Pawn. Acaces looked at the unconscious Amelia Jacob, looking into all of her memories to get a better understanding of the situation with the Jacob family. After a few seconds of sniffing through twisted memoirs of her, he waved at her figure, sending her to the headquarters of his church with a message for Blaze. The situation of the Jacob family, well, it was just Aemon being Aemon again. His senses swept the entire Tudor Empire in an instant. The sky and sun are his domains. Under them, nothing can escape his gaze, not even the reticent darkness. There Aemon was, sitting on a throne in a mansion in Trier, city of the sun. The angel of time looked up, smiling, as though he had noticed his gaze. Acaces didn't bother to hide it, anyway. Acaces walked. The scenery around him, the order of space, alerted with each step, modifying the concept of distance to his will. 10 years passed. Experiencing time, at his level, was very different from the perspective of humans. A passage of 10 years is nothing to him. Though he remained the same as before, spending most, if not all, of his time with Lilith and the rest of his time planning and preparing for the approaching fight with death, much had changed around him. The war, the dance of the living and death, as it is now famously known, was an utter disaster despite all their involvement in it. The dead know no fear, no caution, no emotion, and unlike the living, they rise and rise again at each of their falls, while the living fall into their cold and still embrace, only to rise again as one of the ranks among the dead. The death himself used his authority for it, unleashing a disaster on the front lines at the start of the war. Though not all was lost, despite how it may appear, he and other gods also intervened, using their authorities to help their angels. They captured an absolute advantage. Then, it was shattered by Sosrir, who sent the entire Red Army that was once led by Medici, but now by Ouroboros, Angel of Destiny, into the battlefield. In response to this, Alitza Tudor ordered Aemon, Angel of Time, to enter the war, as he was the only available king of angels on their side. Diana was already deep into her research and preparation for the apotheosis ritual. It was utter chaos. He, like all the gods, sat at the edge of his chair, watching the developments of the ready to enter the battlefield at a moment's notice. And it almost erupted one time when Aemon nearly managed to kill Azek Eggers, only to be stopped by Ouroboros. The battle of the living and the dead continues on the front lines, the canals connecting the northern and southern continents, which were nearly destroyed and tainted. While the war is going on the front lines, the situation in the Tudor Empire is taking a bad turn since Alitza didn't recognize Diana's religion as orthodox and kept silent about it. Crown and faith, two distinct concepts, which were the foundation of the empire, were slowly cracking and starting to oppose each other. Ads by PubFuture. A bloody civil war is not far off if nothing is to be done about the situation. Even though his faith may triumph in the end, it will be bloody nonetheless. And he's going to put an end to it before it even starts. With a ripple of space in his footsteps, subsiding, Acasus descended before the Angel of Time, who was standing up from his throne and walking towards him slowly, a smile permeating his lips. "Congratulations, Acasus," he toasted, passing a glass of wine to him while holding another high at him. "Save it," Acasus said, not partaking in his toast and leaving him hanging. Seemingly unaffected by rudeness, Aemon merely chuckled, before gulping both glasses of wine down right before him. "So," he drawled, raising his brows, "why has the sun god graced his presence before me?" "Stop with these pretenses, Aemon," Acasus said, furrowing his brows. "It's getting annoying. Trust me, the last thing you want to do is to annoy me more." Aemon walked near him, looked at him in the eyes, before answering. "Okay, I will leave them alone," Acasus said, narrowing his eyes. "You will not only do that. If you are to stay within my empire, you are to follow my rules and order like everyone else. You are not above it, so tuck your tails. If not," Aemon asked defiantly, his head raised high, his monocle gleaming. Acasus' indifferent countenance collapsed to form a slight smirk. "You are gravely mistaken about something, Aemon." His smirk faded, as his golden eyes darkened with a haze, like a brewing cataclysmic storm. "I will kill you, and your brother and your father won't be able to save you this time unless they wish to pay a heavy price." He cocked his head. "A price in the end, they will not pay for you. Do you think you are really that important?" Amon's smile faded at his words, while he continued, his words laced with indifference. "From the beginning to the end, you are nothing more than a byproduct, a thing which the Creator didn't intend in the first place. You were not but anything in his eyes. And the funny thing is, you always knew the truth deep in your heart, yet never tried to face it. Ha, so much for the most courageous and defiant blasphemer." Ads by PubFuture. Amon's lips thinned into a line, but his gaze at him never flinched from his eyes. He finally spoke in a neutral voice. "I will follow your order with all my heart, Your Excellency." It was a ruse. Acasus knew it. Even if his half-truth remarks managed to get through the Angel of Time, it wouldn't change who he was in essence. Now it was just Aemon putting up an act in front of him to save himself. Aemon, the Angel of Time, will not fall by his hand. And the problems with the pathways of mysteries also completely sealed any fate of Aemon becoming a god in this epic. So, honestly, he didn't really care much about Aemon, as there was already a lot on his plate that needed to be dealt with. His previous remarks were indeed half-truths. The Creator didn't really care for the existence of Aemon in the beginning. Hell, he didn't even trust him with the secrets of Ro's redemption. But it changed, or it would change, as Acasus knew that in the original timeline, the Creator actually stood on the side of Aemon against Klein for the final battle for the Lord of Mysteries. Acasus snorted dismissively. "Enough with that, you shall return all the characteristics that you stole from the Jacob family to them." He raised his hand. A ripple spread out, sweeping the entire Tudor Empire. He purified all the still-alive members of the Jacob family from the parasites of Aemon. Aemon just nodded at his order, his head hung low, his face covered in his own shadow. Acasus finally ordered, ripples erupting from the soles of his feet. "You are not to participate in the upcoming war between Alitza and Solomon." "Yes, Your Excellency," Aemon said equivocally. The figure of Acasus faded away into particles of light, as the ripples in reality subsided. However, the voice of Acasus still lingered in the air, carrying sharp words. "No-vel-bjn.c ohm. Don't think I don't know the plans already brewing in your head. If any of that succeeds in the end, it is only because I allowed it. You are still a pawn in my hand. You never escaped, and you would do well to remember that, Aemon." Hearing that, Aemon looked up, a grin forming on his lips, his eyes darkening as he adjusted his monocle. "We will see about that." Then, he too was gone, leaving the room in an eerie silence. Chapter 148, Purge. The headquarters of the Church of the Eternal Blazing Sun, Trier, the City of the Sun. Blaze Larson pinched his brows in a headache, looking at the trembling woman who sat in front of him. "Amelia," he said, trying to make his voice appear as soothing as possible. "If you want time, I would give you. You don't have to force yourself." "No." Amelia shook her head, tucking her quivering arms in her long coat that covered her figure. "I am fine." "Your Excellency," Angel of miracles, I can detail it. Blaze sighed, placing the pen and document on the table in front of him and abruptly rising from his chair, causing the other to flinch in fear. He walked towards her as she trembled, trying to get up from the chair, seemingly wanting to make a run for it. The Angel of miracles, however, appeared in front of her path and made her flinch again, taking a step back. "You are not fine, Amelia," he said sternly. "Your mind was almost in shambles not long ago. So don't come knocking on my door and wasting my time again until you feel great. I mean really great. Now go back to the infirmary for your own good." Amelia nodded quickly and got around him, quite swiftly leaving the room. Her trembling legs didn't seem to bother her in the least this time. Blaze sighed, walking back to his chair and sitting down. His dim eyes were looking at the mountains of paperwork on the table that needed his review and immediate attention. God, how much he hated paperwork and Lucas, who pushed everything on his head and went to battlefield. It was meant to be Lucas's duties, while he acted as the thundering sword of their lord. But now, their roles have almost been reversed for a decade. As Lucas and other angles took to the front lines while he stayed in the headquarters, the presence of an angel was required here all the time. He really wanted to perform a miracle to let it all be completed on its own, but he suppressed that desire, no matter how tempting it was. The documents before him are of the utmost importance, many involving information from the situation on the front lines, empires, and other churches. It requires his unequivocal attention. Ads by PubFuture. Blaze took a sip of coffee as he took the most recent file from the table, which had a detailed report of the previous situation of the Jacob family. The Jacob family, the lapdogs of the Blood Emperor. He obviously knew the sudden and strange situation of this angel family. He had ordered his Lightbringers to keep tabs on almost all of the angel families except the Aemon family. If anything is remotely determined to be unusual, it will be immediately reported back to the headquarters and an investigation will immediately begin. The investigations into the strange situation of the Jacob families quickly bore results, as the truth was actually quite easy to infer. It was Aemon, the infamous blasphemer. He single-handedly brought down an entire angel family without making a disturbance in the slightest. When he heard the news of this, Blaze could do nothing, as his hands were tied on this. The relationship between their church and the crown was already deteriorating, so they could not dabble in the affairs of the chaotic retinue of the crown. The strain in relationship had actually begun with his lord's order, the order to suppress both the Antigonus and Abraham families. Faith is a powerful power that can be easily used to manipulate public masses to one's will, and in some ways, faith is even above the crown in the hearts of the citizens, especially their lord's faith. So, they manipulated the public and began to isolate the two families, even preventing news of their achievements in the war of living and death from spreading in the empire. The Abraham family was still in shambles with the disappearance of their ancestor and his granddaughter, both of whom were important pillars of the family. They just disappeared from the face of the earth with not even the slightest news for about a decade. The last angel of the Abraham family gathered enough resolve and courage to ask the Blood Emperor himself about this. After all, Sylvia Abraham was engaged to him, and Bethel Abraham was a consul for him. If anybody had any clue about their situation, it should have been none other than their excellency. Blaze had no idea whether the Blood Emperor had responded, perhaps only his lord did. But, judging the improvement of the situation within the Abraham family after that angel's visit to the royal palace, the Blood Emperor should have at least provided some satisfactory answer. Then there was the Antigonus family, who hated their lord. Yeah, Blaze knew how ridiculous that sounded, but that was the truth. The family, which consisted only of a brother and sister, actually hated their lord. It all stemmed from an event nearly 2 centuries ago during the War of the Seven Kingdoms. Diana and Medici fought their legendary battle across the northern continent, which nearly caused the destruction of the Night Kingdom ruled by the Antigonus family. Though the brother and sister duo weren't that blatant in their hate, it still couldn't escape his sharp eyes. When the two families found out about the action of the church, they did the obvious, they complained to the Blood Emperor. This was what first caused a crack in the relationship between the faith and the crown, which further deepened when the Blood Emperor didn't recognize Diana's religion as orthodox. Ads by PubFuture. He even heard from his lord that Antigonus somehow managed to get the support of Aemon and the Angel of Imagination to sway the lingering hesitation of the Blood Emperor over the situation of the religion of Diana. So yeah, the situation between the crown and faith is at a boiling point. All that's needed is a fuse to blow the whole thing up into the air. A war of the gods will also surely erupt with this. The chances of them coming out victorious in the civil war are almost a certainty, but it will not be without a heavy loss, a loss which the empire cannot bear with the dance of the living and death going on in the front lines. And he is doing everything he can to delay that as long as possible while waiting for the defining orders from the Lord. Blaze finally looked at the document of the Jacob family in his hand, turned to the empty pages and began recording the developments of the Jacob family. They became vassals of their lord. After that, he truly didn't know any other information. He can't even divine on this issue, as it involves the gods and the King of Angles. The information about the entire current situation of the Jacob family is absolutely necessary to delay the news of them becoming his lord's vassal from reaching the ears of the Blood Emperor, as this could very well be the fuse. He asked Amelia Jacob after she woke up, but the woman hadn't recovered from shock after everything that happened. However, after hearing his request, she tried to gather herself to answer many times, only to fail with stuttering and waste his time on her. Blaze also considered his other options, praying to his lord and procuring information from Diana. His lord didn't answer his prayers, and the saint he sent to her still hadn't returned yet. So, all he could do was wait, while already coming up with contiguous plans to deal with the fallout, as he had felt it was already too late. Blaze jerked his head up from the document, looking forward. A light erupted in the room, morphing into the projection of his lord. The eternal blazing sun ordered him immediately, without giving him any chance to speak. It's time, Blaze. Begin the purge. If you encounter any resistance that you are unable to overcome, simply pray to me, and I will personally send down divine punishment. The Church of Evernight Goddess will also join with us. Yes, my lord. Blaze stood up and nodded solemnly. N-O-V-E, in.C Om. War of Gods is about to begin. Announce a state of emergency immediately. The eternal blazing sun gave his final order. Then, his projection faded away into particles of light, leaving Blaze, who resolutely took out the sacred emblem and pressed on its surface in a peculiar pattern, causing it to light up and produce ripples in the space that began to spread out. Instantly, sirens boomed across Trier, the city of the sun. Chapter 149, God-Slaying Legion. Astral World, Solar System. The unparalleled sun floated in the center, providing light and vitality. The brilliant sun blasted scorching solar flares onto Astral World, melting everything in its path. A golden chariot pulled by majestic white horses emerged from the surging sun, their hooves splitting the very fabric of space with a neigh and bray. The silver reins were in the hands of eternal blazing sun, who stood at the helm. He rode the sun chariot, the uniqueness of the sun pathway, at the speed of light towards the blue planet near the barrier. His golden gaze swept towards the barrier, narrowing in thought. But then two divine figures appeared in front of him, blocking his path and compelling him to pull his reins and stop the sun chariot. The divine figures were none other than the Evernight Goddess and Earth Mother. The concealment remains, Evernight Goddess observed, her hands clasped across her chest. But you have to quit being flashy if you want it to hold on. You're being unreasonable, Ammonizes, Earth Mother said with a smile, her gaze fixed on eternal blazing sun. It's a part of him, he simply cannot stop it. Eternal blazing sun snorted. Enough. It is no time to partake in jests and jeers. The war is about to start. Evernight Goddess swept her gaze away to a distant azure planet, her voice still heavy. Salinger shows no signs of ever departing the underworld. Give it a little time. Earth Mother spoke as she rested her hand on Evernight Goddess' shoulder. He'll have to leave someday, one way or another. The longer it takes, the more worrying it becomes. Eternal blazing sun murmured as he let go of the reins. But, once again, we must concentrate on the issue, which is as troubling as Salinger. Evernight Goddess finally remarked, solemnly looking into the eyes of the eternal blazing sun. Are you positive about this? Ads by PubFuture. Yes. Eternal blazing sun gave a nod. With the assistance of Aemon and Adam, Antigonus has already accommodated the uniqueness of the fool. They manipulated him and did a number on him. Now, the Lord of Mysteries, will is waking in him. If nothing is done to stop this, then we can soon expect the resurrected pillar on our heads. The tension in the atmosphere was palpable. Earth Mother inquired sharply, shattering the brief silence. Then why didn't you just stop them before they started? Lilith, the situation isn't as straightforward as you think it is. Eternal blazing sun responded, his gaze riveted on his love. Ethereally, Evernight Goddess stepped between them. What has been done has already been done. Eternal Blazing Sun grunted, his gaze shifting away from the Earth Mother and toward the Evernight Goddess. Antigonus is also a member of Alitsa Tutor's Legion. After I and Lilith have besieged Alitsa, you can besiege him. We will also join with you after dealing with Alitsa. The Evernight Goddess solemnly nodded. The Eternal Blazing Sun continued. If Solomon and Sosrir decide to intervene, Bodil and Harabergen will handle them. I've already spoken with Bodil, and even if Harabergen did not intervene in the battle out of spite, Trunsoest remains. I will take care of Antigonus. Evernight Goddess nodded, her figure receding into the darkness. The war has begun. Don't kill him, the Eternal Blazing Sun stated. Be careful, Ammonizes. From behind, Earth Mother yelled. I won't. The mystical voice of the Evernight Goddess remained in the blackness as she faded away. I will. Eternal Blazing Sun looked at the darkness for a time before turning to face his love, who stared at him with her arms folded. They had a little glaring contest in the infinity of space. N-O-V-E in .c ohm. Come on, he finally said, sighing in defeat. Earth Mother pouted as she floated down to his helm and stood beside him, arms crossed. As the white horses neighed and pulled the solar chariot, Eternal Blazing Sun tightened his reins. You're scared, Earth Mother murmured suddenly, glancing at her love. You are afraid of the Lord of the Mysteries. Ads by PubFuture. Indeed, Eternal Blazing Sun admitted candidly. I am scared of him. Earth Mother peered at her love, before leaning on him in silence. The Andes mountain range. The holy mountains had turned scarlet all the way up to its black haunting crown. Under the last peak of the range lay a huge lowland. There was a massive army of 100,000 soldiers covering it like a crimson ocean. Soldier by soldier, troop by troop, company by company, they crowded together, their palms wet and their eyes ablaze. Aemon and Antigonus stood close to each other at the summit, looking down at the massive troops indifferently. A thunderous footstep shook the entire holy mountain, driving fear into the hearts of the bravest men and women. Their hearts thumped viscously against their own chest. Stormy clouds stamped their cruel markings on the sky, dazzling everything as scarlet lightning began tearing through the swarthy gloomy clouds. The footsteps eventually came to a halt. There he was, clad in red royal robes with a scabbard attached to it. His red hair was crowned with a gleaming black crown. The world turned crimson with his presence. The Blood Emperor. The Blood Emperor eyed his legion standing in the middle of Aemon and Antigonus. He spoke, his voice majestic and loud, resounding over the planet. Heed my soldiers, long, dark nights of trials and tribulations lie ahead of us. Not only great dangers, but also many misfortunes, shortcomings, mistakes, and disappointments will undoubtedly be our lot. Death and sorrow will be our companions, hardship our garment, constancy and valor our only shield. We must be united, undaunted, and inflexible. Our qualities and deeds must burn and glow through the dark embers of death and chaos. All hail, Blood Emperor! Antigonus stated immediately, his palm across his chest, bowing before the Red Priest. All hail the Blood Emperor! All hail the Blood Emperor! Ads by PubFuture. All hail the Blood Emperor! The troops began chanting fiercely. Their eyes were inflamed with madness and bloodlust. Their chanting was jumbled at first, but the Blood Emperor brought it into order with a swirl of his finger. The shouts rumbled across the Tudor Empire like waves upon waves of a tsunami, trembling the empire. Every word in the chant appeared to contain an unseen yet terrifying force. The tremendous words ripped through the air, rushing towards the Blood Emperor, who was engulfed by red chaos. Under the authority of the Blood Emperor, it all merged into one, linking to the Emperor himself. As his crimson eyes surged into laurel black, the chaos subsided. The Blood Emperor had become one with his legion. His legion has now surpassed Medici's Red War Legion to become the strongest in human history. His legion was known as the God-slaying Legion. Its purpose is already self-evident from its name, to slay a god with the might of all. The Blood Emperor opened his arms wide. Thick crimson tendrils of lightning shrouded the sky. Charge, charge forth for the dreams. Charge forth for the hope. Charge forth for the honor. Charge forth for the faith. Our path shall be one that is forged with blood, victory, and madness. In our path, there is no need for cheers or jubilation. Only fear and surrender are worthy of honoring us. Charge forth my might soldiers and realize our greatness in dreams. Let the world quiver under our daunting march. The Blood Emperor bellowed. The angels speared their holy wings and raised their weapons to the crimson sky, joining the rest of the army in a roar. And the world quivered. Aemon looked at the roaring legion. It is truly a pity to end this journey in this way. He sighed and glanced up at the sky. It was there, sweeping through the crimson clouds in a burst of brilliant light. A white blot of lightning erupted from it, plummeting onto the god-slaying legion. No, the Blood Emperor roared. It was, however, too late. The white streak of lightning fell on the unsuspecting and bellowing war legion. Then the world became white. Chapter 150, War and Disorder. Divine punishment descended, and for a little moment, the world flashed white before receding, revealing a perfectly unscathed god-slaying legion. The legion's surroundings were engulfed in crimson darkness. In the embers of chaos and blood, the whole fabric of existence was warping. It was the authority of war and disorder. Ha ha! The Blood Emperor bellowed fearlessly, his crazy eyes locked on the brilliant sky. Do you think I'm a moron? He then cast a sidelong glance towards Aemon. Aemon looked down at the horrified troops. The tranquil darkness gleamed in his monocle. The warriors slumped on the ground, falling into a deep sleep. However, the link with the Blood Emperor remains. Through this link, Alexa summoned all of their power into him, becoming stronger exponentially. A deep, chaotic darkness descended near the Blood Emperor. A middle-aged man dressed in black regal attire emerged from it. His head was adorned with a black crown. Black Emperor. The two emperors stood at the mountain summit, looking at the sky with fierce eyes filled with a striking identical hatred. In the skies, Earth Mother used her earthy authority to aim her hand at the two emperors and raise her hand high towards the astral world. The two emperors did not fight back. Their figures teleported from Earth to the astral world, accompanied by the eternal blazing sun and Earth Mother. At least temporarily, peace reigned in the Andes Mountains. Antigonus breathed a sigh of relief as the unsettling muttering in his ears faded with the decreasing heavenly pressure of the eternal blazing sun. He turned to face Aemon and opened his mouth to discuss their strategy. Suddenly, he saw a blurry figure. This person was dressed in a long, tiered black gown. Her beautiful and gentle face was covered in thin black gauze. Her eyes stood out the most, as if they were compressing the entire starry night sky. It made one feel both peace and uncontrollable fear. Evernight Goddess. Antigonus' eyes were filled with terror at the sight of the woman, and his mind flashed back to the horrible recollections of the past. His heart plummeted into the pits of sorrow, leaving him vulnerable to an enemy strike for a brief moment. And for the Evernight Goddess, this was more than enough. Antigonus was instantly erased with an eraser, as if he were merely a sketch. Ads by PubFuture. The Evernight Goddess then looked down at the sleeping legion, softly waving her hand. The god-slaying legion was engulfed in darkness as it erupted. She also kept this area concealed. After a few moments, the darkness broke through the war and disorder authorities and enveloped the legion, causing them to disappear forever in the darkness, serving their connection with Blood Emperor. The Evernight Goddess eventually turned to face the Angel of Time, who bowed lightly with his distinctive smile on his lips. Evernight. She just spared him a glance before looking ahead for a moment and fading away into darkness. Aemon sighed as he adjusted his monocle. He began heading toward the other end of the summit, where there was an oddly placed wooden bench. Adam sat on that wooden bench with a simple white cloak and a silver cross around his neck, just like any other average priest. He was holding an empty book and was writing on the first page. Aemon sat with the priest, his legs crossed, his brows raised at the book. What is the title? Intis Empire. Adam smiled gently. N-O-V-E in .c Ohm. _ Palace of Eternity, Backland. Trunsoest and Aurnia strolled out onto the balcony of the majestic palace, their hands tightly together. Their eyes were fixated on the sky. The time has come, Trunsoest said, her clear eyes fixed on his love. I must confront him and put an end to this once and for all. Only one thing will prevail by the sunset, disorder or order. You will triumph, Aurnia whispered softly while kissing his lips. You are always so positive. Trunsoest chuckled and shook his head. You know, there's a chance I might die. A finger was placed on his lips, preventing him from speaking. Aurnia said again, her voice becoming firmer with each iteration. You shall triumph, my love. Her hand trailed to his, and she could feel his heart throbbing viscerally against his chest. Believe in yourself. At the end of the day, order equals chaos. While disorder is only a small part of chaos. It's a mere reflection. Ads by PubFuture. In the end, Order will always win. How do you know what to say all the time? Do you practice your speeches? Trunsoest asked, his eyes narrowing with joy. Just for you. Aurnia huffs a soft laugh, patting his chest after she felt his thumping heart calm. Trunsoest put his arms around her waist and drew her in closer, their faces inches apart, hot breath flooding their lungs. I will win, Trunsoest declared firmly at the end. Go, my love, Aurnia beamingly smiled, and slay the Black Emperor. Trunsoest kissed her fervently and nodded, before his figure vanished into brass particles, leaving Aurnia alone, her stare lingering on Trunsoest's fading figure, before running towards the edge of the balcony, her eyes set on the sky, which had already been ablaze with fire and light. The floating continent, astral world. The god of steam and machinery gazed out the window of the topmost silver tower into the limitless astral universe. "Milord," Evelyn finally broke the silence by asking. "The war of gods?" "No." The steam god shook his head. "There's no point in going up against him again." He turned to face his angel. "How is the project going?" "It's almost done, milord." Evelyn nodded, her gaze somber as ever. "All that is required for it to become total is your authority. I'll come after the gods, war is over." After some thought, the god of steam said. Evelyn nodded and walked out from the tower, leaving the deity alone in his thoughts. The god of steam and machinery shifted his gaze to the astral world, where the god battle had already begun. His authority engulfed the entire continent, shielding it from the powerful waves unleashed by the fight. The project was part of a larger plan he devised just for Diana Knight. He will strike her death knell when she starts her ascension. Even Occuses wouldn't be able to save her at the moment. Unknown location, Northern Continent. Ads by PubFuture. Diana Knight approached the bronze tower's window, staring out into the astral realm. The gods, war is about to commence. According to her probing, the probabilities of the god falling in this fight are far too high. But she was unconcerned about her lord. Her lord's power increased exponentially after ascending to become the symbol of power. In terms of raw power, her lord should be unrivaled in the sequence -0 category. Diana finally turned aside and headed towards the globe projection. The deadline is approaching, her preparations are nearly finished. She knew, though, that Artisan would not stand by and witness her ascension. He is bound to do something. She needs to speak with the Lord about this. Diana clutched her purple book firmly. Her figure crumbles into information, surging towards and blending with the envisioned world. Everything within went white instantly. The truth has been revealed. In the infinite space between Earth and Venus, astral world. Alitza and Solomon descended, solemnly facing forward, their hands holding their weapons. A golden chariot was dragged along the infinite starry sky by 4 majestic horses, emitting an infinite amount of pure light. Occuses grasped the reins in one hand and the golden spear in the other. Umbella is not there, Solomon grumbled, his eyes narrowing on the traitor. It was a disgrace. He loathed this alliance with his soul. But he bore the hatred only to deal with the bigger threat, Occuses. And the white angel will fall today. They will make certain of it. She is in concealment, Alitza answered flatly, his gaze fixated on the Occuses in the chariot, waiting for the right opportunity. The magnificent horses neighed. Occuses let the reins fall and vaulted high from his chariot. The sun chariot instantly disintegrated into light particles. Occuses descended before them, his stride shattering the fabric of reality. He spun his spear in his palm, a wide grin on his lips. From him erupted a vast divine aura, exuding infinite power and terror. The reality around him was torn asunder by the mighty aura, revealing the starless void. His steps reverberated in the astral world like the most destructive thunder in the cosmos. The mighty aura pressed down on Alitza and Solomon's shoulders, quivering their figures. Fear, which they thought they had conquered, returned, spreading its claws and piercing their hearts, flooding them with doubts and questions, freezing them.